How to Overcome Self-Sabotage. You set goals, make plans, and feel the excitement of moving forward, only to find yourself stuck, making irrational choices that push you further from what you want. It feels as if something deep inside resists every step, an invisible force quietly unraveling your progress. This is not laziness or lack of willpower. It is self-sabotage, the hidden work of the unconscious mind. Carl Jung discovered that much of our self-sabotaging behavior comes from repressed aspects of ourselves, buried in what he called the shadow. These hidden parts influence our choices, shaping our reality in ways we don't consciously recognize. Part 2. The hidden power of the unconscious mind. You have likely experienced moments when your own actions seem to contradict what you truly desire. Maybe you've worked hard toward a professional goal, only to make a sudden decision that derails your progress. Perhaps you have built meaningful relationships, only to withdraw when they start feeling too close. There is a deep frustration that comes with knowing what you want but still acting against it, as if some unseen force inside you is pulling the strings. Carl Jung dedicated his life to understanding this hidden force, revealing that much of our behavior is not directed by conscious thought, but rather by unconscious influences that shape our lives from the shadows. These influences often emerge from aspects of ourselves that we have ignored, denied, or buried, creating an inner division that silently guides our choices. The unconscious mind is not a passive background of forgotten memories and random thoughts. It is active, alive, and constantly working beneath the surface. Every experience, emotion, and belief that we have ever suppressed continues to exist within us, influencing our reactions, desires, and fears. Jung referred to this hidden space as the shadow, a psychological storehouse where we place all the traits and emotions that we refuse to acknowledge. Society, family, and personal experiences shape what we consider acceptable or unacceptable about ourselves. As children, we learn which behaviors earn approval and which invite rejection. And in order to fit in, we start repressing the parts of ourselves that seem undesirable. Over time, these rejected aspects do not disappear. They become part of the unconscious, waiting for the right moment to emerge. Self-sabotage is one of the ways the unconscious mind asserts its influence. It is not a matter of simply lacking discipline or motivation. It is a result of inner conflict between what we consciously desire and what the unconscious mind is trying to protect. Imagine a person who has always dreamed of financial success, but repeatedly makes choices that prevent them from moving forward. Each time an opportunity arises, they hesitate, overthink, or find an excuse to back out. On the surface, it looks like fear of failure, but the real reason lies deeper. Perhaps in their past, they associated success with arrogance, cold ambition, or selfishness, traits that were rejected and buried in the unconscious. Their mind learned to equate financial independence with something negative, and now, whenever success seems possible, their shadow steps in to prevent it. This internal struggle is not limited to career choices. It affects relationships, health, and personal growth. A person who deeply desires love may find themselves repeatedly drawn to emotionally unavailable partners, sabotaging their own happiness. Someone who values well-being may engage in unhealthy habits, despite knowing better. These contradictions are not random. They are signs that something within the unconscious mind is unresolved. When parts of ourselves remain hidden in the shadow, they develop their own autonomy, acting independently of our conscious will. Jung compared this to a government operating in secret, making decisions without the knowledge of its leader. When an aspect of the shadow remains unrecognized, it continues to exert control from the background, subtly steering us away from anything that threatens its existence. Recognizing this influence requires deep self-awareness. Many people spend their lives unaware that their unconscious mind is at odds with their conscious desires. They attribute their struggles to external circumstances, bad luck, or personal weakness, without realizing that the real battle is happening within them. Jung believed that the only way to regain control is by bringing these hidden aspects into consciousness, illuminating the parts of ourselves that we have rejected. this is not an easy process. The unconscious mind does not reveal its secrets willingly, and the shadow resists exposure. However, the more we ignore it, the stronger its grip becomes. One of the most powerful ways the unconscious influences us is through emotional triggers. When an aspect of the shadow is touched, it reacts with intensity, often in ways that seem irrational. A person who has repressed feelings of vulnerability may lash out in anger whenever they feel exposed. Someone who has suppressed their need for validation may reject compliments or sabotage relationships where they feel truly seen. These reactions feel automatic, as if something deep inside has taken control. In reality, they are signs that the unconscious is speaking. The more we pay attention to these moments, the more we can uncover what has been hidden. The unconscious also communicates through dreams, patterns of behavior, and even physical sensations. Jung encouraged exploring these signals, as they provide clues about what the shadow contains. A recurring dream about being chased may indicate a part of the self that is being avoided. Persistent feelings of self-doubt may point to a rejected aspect of confidence that needs reintegration. The body itself can manifest unresolved conflicts through tension, illness, or fatigue, signaling that something within needs attention. By observing these patterns, we can start to recognize the ways in which the unconscious is influencing our daily lives. Overcoming self-sabotage requires a shift in perspective. Rather than seeing it as an enemy to defeat, it must be understood as a message from within. The unconscious does not sabotage us out of malice. It does so to protect aspects of ourselves that have been exiled. If we continue to reject these parts, they will continue to act in secrecy, disrupting our plans and decisions. The solution lies in integration, acknowledging and accepting what has been hidden rather than pushing it further into the dark. Bringing the unconscious into awareness is a process of deep self-exploration. It requires looking at the moments of resistance, the habits that seem to control us, and the emotions that arise unexpectedly. It means questioning why certain desires seem unattainable and why old patterns keep repeating. This is not about changing who we are, but about reclaiming the parts of ourselves that we have lost. Jung believed that true freedom comes from self-knowledge, from becoming whole rather than remaining divided. The more we integrate what has been hidden, the less power the unconscious has over us. This journey is not about perfection or immediate change. It is about learning to recognize the ways in which the unconscious mind shapes our reality and gradually reclaiming control. The shadow is not something to fear. It is a part of us that needs understanding. By bringing light to what has been buried, we can break free from the patterns of self-sabotage and move forward with greater clarity and purpose. Part 3. Understanding the shadow self. Deep within the mind, there is a hidden space where all the aspects of ourselves that we have rejected, ignored, or deemed unacceptable continue to exist. Carl Jung called this space the shadow. It is not a separate entity, nor is it something inherently evil. It is simply the part of us that remains in darkness because we refuse to see it. From an early age, we are taught what is acceptable and what is not. We learn which traits bring approval and which ones lead to rejection. To fit in, we push away the parts of ourselves that do not align with the image we are expected to maintain. Over time, these hidden traits do not disappear. They become part of the unconscious mind, shaping our thoughts, behaviors, and decisions in ways we do not fully understand. The shadow holds everything that we suppress: emotions, desires, memories, and instincts that we have been conditioned to believe are unworthy or dangerous. A person who was punished for expressing anger as a child may have buried that emotion deep within, only to find it surfacing later in uncontrollable outbursts or passive-aggressive behaviors. Someone who grew up believing that vulnerability is a weakness may struggle to form deep connections, fearing the very intimacy they secretly crave. These rejected aspects of the self do not fade away. They wait, influencing our actions from the depths of the unconscious. The more a person tries to deny or suppress an aspect of themselves, the stronger its grip becomes. The shadow does not remain silent. It finds ways to make itself known. Self-sabotage is one of its most powerful tools. When a hidden part of the self is ignored for too long, it begins to take control in ways that are difficult to recognize. A person who has repressed their need for love may repeatedly push away those who care about them, sabotaging relationships before they can grow. Someone who has buried their desire for success may find themselves procrastinating, failing to follow through on their goals. These actions feel inexplicable on the surface, but they are not random. They are the shadow's way of ensuring that its needs are not forgotten. Understanding the shadow requires a willingness to look at the parts of ourselves that we would rather ignore. This is not an easy task. The unconscious mind does not give up its secrets without resistance. Many people spend their lives unaware that they are at war with themselves, believing that their struggles are the result of external forces rather than internal conflicts. They blame circumstances, other people, or bad luck, never realizing that the true cause of their suffering lies within. Jung believed that true growth comes not from avoiding the shadow, but from integrating it. The process of integration does not mean indulging in destructive behaviors or embracing every hidden impulse. It means recognizing these aspects, understanding their origins, and bringing them into conscious awareness. When the shadow remains unacknowledged, it gains power over the conscious mind. It influences decisions in ways that feel automatic, as if something else is making choices on our behalf. This can manifest as sudden mood swings, irrational fears, or self-destructive habits that seem to emerge without reason. A person may find themselves drawn to situations that repeat past traumas, unable to break free from patterns that bring them pain. This is not because they consciously seek suffering, but because the shadow is directing them toward unresolved conflicts. Until these conflicts are brought into the light, they will continue to shape reality from behind the scenes. Recognizing the shadow is the first step toward reclaiming control. This requires an honest examination of thoughts, emotions, and behaviors that seem to contradict conscious desires. It means paying attention to moments of intense emotional reaction, as these are often signals from the unconscious. Feelings of shame, anger, or resentment may indicate parts of the self that have been suppressed for too long. Dreams, recurring life patterns, and even physical sensations can provide insight into what remains hidden. The key is not to judge or reject these aspects, but to approach them with curiosity and understanding. Bringing the shadow into awareness does not mean losing oneself in negativity. On the contrary, it is a path toward wholeness. Many of the traits buried in the shadow are not inherently bad. They have simply been labeled as such due to personal or societal conditioning. Strength, ambition, assertiveness, and vulnerability are all natural aspects of the self. Yet depending on one's upbringing, they may have been cast into the darkness. A person who has always seen themselves as kind and selfless may discover suppressed anger or resentment that needs to be acknowledged. Someone who has always identified as independent may realize that their shadow contains a deep longing for connection. These realizations are not signs of weakness. They are opportunities for growth. The integration of the shadow requires patience and self-compassion. It is a process of learning to accept all parts of oneself, rather than continuing to divide the mind into acceptable and unacceptable fragments. Jung believed that when a person embraces their full self, including the aspects they have rejected, they gain a sense of inner harmony that cannot be achieved through repression. The battle between conscious and unconscious desires begins to fade, replaced by a deeper understanding of who they truly are. This does not mean that destructive impulses should be acted upon, but that they should be acknowledged, understood, and transformed. Ignoring the shadow does not make it disappear. It only ensures that it will find another way to assert itself, often through behaviors that seem out of control. The more a person resists facing their inner world, the more power the unconscious gains. True freedom comes from awareness, from recognizing that self-sabotage is not a random occurrence, but a message from within. It is an invitation to look deeper, to explore what has been hidden, and to finally bring the unconscious into the light. Part 4. Recognizing the signs of self-sabotage. There are moments in life when progress feels just within reach, yet something invisible holds you back. You make plans, set intentions, and visualize success, only to watch yourself make choices that slowly, sometimes imperceptibly, pull you away from what you truly want. You tell yourself that next time will be different, that you will finally stay on track. But then it happens again. A sudden hesitation, an unexplained lack of motivation, an unexpected distraction. Each one seemingly small on its own, but together they form an undeniable pattern. This is the nature of self-sabotage. It does not arrive as an obvious enemy. It operates in silence, disguising itself as rational choices, fleeting emotions, or inevitable circumstances. It thrives on confusion, making it difficult to recognize that the greatest obstacle is not external, but internal. Self-sabotage is not the result of weakness or failure. It is a defense mechanism deeply rooted in the unconscious mind. Every person carries an internal narrative shaped by past experiences, societal expectations, and personal fears. When a goal or aspiration contradicts these hidden beliefs, the unconscious steps in to restore what it perceives as balance. This is why people often find themselves trapped in repetitive cycles. They are not fighting against the world. They are struggling against a version of themselves that resists change. This resistance is not random. It follows patterns, and those patterns reveal the deeper forces at play. Recognizing the signs of self-sabotage begins with observing these patterns. Procrastination is one of the most common ways the unconscious prevents forward movement. It is easy to dismiss procrastination as laziness or poor time management, but it often serves a psychological function. The unconscious mind may associate progress with risk, responsibility, or even pain. A person who hesitates to take action may not fear failure, but rather success, because success carries unknown expectations. If a past experience linked ambition with isolation or stress, the mind may create distractions to keep that ambition at a safe distance. These distractions appear as harmless habits: checking the phone, reorganizing the desk, waiting for the perfect moment. But they are calculated moves by the unconscious to avoid what it perceives as a threat. Decision-making is another arena where self-sabotage reveals itself. People often believe they are making logical choices, but the unconscious has a way of steering them toward familiar outcomes. Someone who consistently chooses partners who are emotionally unavailable may not realize they are recreating an old wound. They are not seeking pain intentionally, but their unconscious has linked love with struggle, and so it pulls them toward the same dynamics again and again. The same applies to career decisions. A person may reject opportunities that seem too good to be true, convincing themselves that they are not ready or not qualified. They are not reacting to the present situation, but to an invisible script written long ago, one that tells them they do not deserve more than what they already have. Emotional reactions also provide insight into unconscious sabotage. When certain situations trigger an intense emotional response, it is often because they are touching something unresolved. A person who becomes unusually defensive when receiving praise may carry a belief that they are unworthy of recognition. Someone who feels overwhelmed by simple tasks may have internalized the idea that they are incapable of handling responsibility. These reactions are not logical, but they are deeply ingrained. They are the voice of the shadow, surfacing in moments of vulnerability to reinforce old narratives. The unconscious does not communicate in words. It speaks through impulses, emotions, and bodily sensations. It does not say, "You don't deserve success," but instead creates a feeling of discomfort whenever success is near. It does not announce, "You are afraid of intimacy," but instead generates subtle resistance when a relationship becomes too close. The body itself can act as a messenger of unconscious conflict. Stress, tension, and unexplained fatigue are often signs that the mind is at war with itself. When a person repeatedly experiences physical discomfort in certain situations, it may be a clue that their unconscious is resisting something. A sudden headache before an important meeting, a wave of exhaustion before working on a personal project, a tightness in the chest when considering a life change. These are not random occurrences. They are signals that something beneath the surface is trying to maintain control. One of the most deceptive aspects of self-sabotage is rationalization. The mind is incredibly skilled at justifying behaviors that protect its hidden fears. A person may convince themselves that they are not ready to take the next step, that they need more time, that the circumstances are not ideal. These justifications feel logical, but they are often illusions created by the unconscious to maintain the status quo. The shadow does not want to be exposed. It thrives in the dark, using carefully crafted reasoning to keep its influence unnoticed. Recognizing self-sabotage requires a willingness to question these justifications. It means looking beyond the immediate explanation and asking what deeper belief might be at work. It involves noticing when the same patterns repeat, when the same excuses appear, when the same discomfort arises at critical moments. Self-sabotage is not an external force. It is an internal strategy designed to protect what is familiar. The unconscious mind does not care about happiness or success. It cares about survival, and to the unconscious, familiarity is survival. Even if familiar patterns cause suffering, they provide a sense of stability. Breaking free from self-sabotage means disrupting this stability, which is why it often feels uncomfortable at first. The process of overcoming self-sabotage does not happen overnight. It begins with awareness, seeing the patterns, understanding the triggers, and recognizing the influence of the unconscious. This awareness alone is powerful. When something hidden is brought into the light, it loses some of its control. The next step is not to fight the shadow, but to understand it. The unconscious does not sabotage out of malice. It does so out of protection. It holds onto old fears, outdated beliefs, and unprocessed emotions, all in an attempt to keep the self safe. The key is not to suppress these aspects further, but to integrate them. There is a reason why people struggle with change, even when they consciously desire it. Change threatens the unconscious mind's sense of security. But true growth requires moving beyond what is comfortable. It means stepping into the unknown, even when the unconscious resists. It means learning to trust that discomfort is not a sign of failure, but a sign that something buried is coming to the surface. Recognizing self-sabotage is not about blame or guilt. It is about reclaiming control from the hidden forces that have been shaping life from the background. It is about stepping out of old patterns and into a future that is not dictated by the past. Part 5. How the shadow manipulates our decisions. The mind is an intricate system of conscious choices and hidden influences, and many of the decisions people make are not as rational as they seem. There are moments when an opportunity presents itself, when everything appears aligned for success, yet something within resists. Excuses arise, distractions take priority, and the path forward suddenly feels overwhelming. This is not a coincidence. It is a shadow at work, subtly steering life in a direction that maintains the status quo. Carl Jung described the shadow as an autonomous force within the unconscious, shaping behavior from beneath the surface. It is not an external enemy, but an unseen presence that influences actions, often without awareness. When an aspect of the shadow remains unacknowledged, it develops its own agenda, one that does not always align with conscious desires. The shadow is not simply a collection of suppressed traits. It is a fragmented part of the self that operates independently. Each time a person represses an emotion, a desire, or a belief, that fragment does not disappear. It continues to exist in the unconscious, acting according to its own logic. If a person has spent years avoiding confrontation, their shadow may develop a fear of conflict so strong that it manipulates their choices to prevent any possibility of tension. They may convince themselves that staying silent is the best option, that avoiding difficult conversations is a sign of wisdom rather than fear. The shadow does not use direct commands. It influences through subtle impulses, reinforcing patterns that keep it hidden. The more a person rejects an aspect of themselves, the stronger its influence becomes. When something is pushed into the unconscious, it does not lose power. It gains autonomy, acting from behind the scenes, shaping reality in ways that are difficult to recognize. A person who has suppressed their need for control may find themselves repeatedly in situations where they feel powerless. They may attract relationships or work environments that reinforce the very dynamic they are trying to avoid. Their conscious mind believes they are seeking freedom, but their unconscious is ensuring that their deepest fear, losing control, remains a constant presence. The shadow does not operate through logic. It works through patterns, drawing people toward the experiences that reflect what they have buried within themselves. Self-sabotage is one of the clearest signs that the shadow is in control. A person sets a goal, feels motivated, and begins moving forward, only to find themselves blocked by unexplained resistance. Suddenly, their energy disappears. Doubts creep in, and they find endless reasons to delay or abandon their plans. The conscious mind may interpret this as a lack of discipline, but the truth lies deeper. If an aspect of the shadow associates success with danger, perhaps because of childhood experiences where standing out led to criticism or rejection, then the unconscious will do everything in its power to prevent that success. It will create distractions, lower motivation, and even produce physical symptoms like fatigue or anxiety. It is not acting out of malice. It is acting out of protection, trying to prevent a perceived threat. The shadow manipulates not only actions, but also thoughts and emotions. Many beliefs that feel like personal truths are actually messages from the unconscious. A person may believe they are unworthy of love, not because it is true, but because their shadow carries past wounds that have not been addressed. They may feel an inexplicable pull towards self-destructive behaviors, not because they lack self-control, but because a hidden part of them is seeking validation through familiar pain. The unconscious mind does not differentiate between positive and negative experiences. It prioritizes what is known. If someone has spent years associating struggle with meaning, they may unconsciously sabotage peace and stability, seeking out challenges even when they are unnecessary. The presence of the shadow can also be detected through projection. When a person reacts strongly to a trait in someone else, whether admiration or disgust, it is often because that trait exists within their own shadow. A person who despises arrogance may have suppressed their own desire to express confidence. A person who idolizes extreme independence may have buried their need for support. These reactions are not random. They are clues that reveal what has been hidden. Jung described projection as the shadow's way of revealing itself indirectly. It places what a person refuses to see in themselves onto others, making it easier to criticize or admire from a distance rather than face within. One of the most powerful ways the shadow manipulates decisions is by reinforcing limiting beliefs. The unconscious mind prefers consistency, even if that consistency is harmful. If a person has always believed they are not good enough, their shadow will find ways to confirm that belief. It will direct attention toward failures, minimize successes, and create scenarios where they feel inadequate. The same applies to fears of abandonment, rejection, or failure. The shadow does not create new experiences. It amplifies existing patterns, ensuring that the beliefs formed in the past continue to shape the present. Breaking free from the shadow's influence requires awareness. Many people live their entire lives controlled by unconscious forces without realizing it. They blame circumstances, bad luck, or personal flaws, never considering that the true conflict is internal. The first step is recognizing the patterns, the recurring obstacles, the unexplainable emotions, the decisions that do not align with conscious desires. Once these patterns become visible, the shadow begins to lose its power. The goal is not to eliminate the shadow, but to integrate it. Jung emphasized that true self-awareness comes from accepting and understanding all aspects of the self, including those that have been rejected. The shadow will not disappear simply because it is acknowledged. It must be confronted with curiosity rather than fear. Each time a person feels resistance, they have an opportunity to ask what part of themselves is trying to speak. Each moment of self-sabotage is a chance to uncover the deeper belief that is driving the behavior. The unconscious mind will always seek to maintain what it knows, but the conscious mind has the ability to choose something different. Integration is not about forcing change. It is about allowing what has been hidden to come into the light, where it can be understood, accepted, and transformed. The more a person understands their shadow, the less control it has over them. The decisions that once felt automatic can be questioned. The patterns that once felt inevitable can be broken. The unconscious does not have to remain a force that works against personal growth. It can become an ally, guiding the process of self-discovery and transformation. The shadow is not the enemy. It is simply the part of the self that has been waiting to be seen. Part 6. The path to integration and overcoming self-sabotage. The unconscious mind is a powerful force, capable of shaping reality in ways that are both subtle and overwhelming. The shadow, with all its repressed desires and hidden fears, has a way of dictating choices without permission. It does not announce itself openly. It works through hesitation, through distractions, through the small but significant ways that self-sabotage takes root. Breaking free from its grip is not a matter of willpower alone. It requires a deeper understanding of what lies beneath, a willingness to confront the parts of oneself that have been ignored for too long. The process of integration is not about erasing the shadow, but about making peace with it, recognizing that the very aspects that seem to work against personal growth can become allies when they are brought into the light. The first step in overcoming self-sabotage is developing awareness. The shadow thrives in secrecy, in the parts of life that are left unquestioned. Each moment of resistance, each instance of self-sabotage, holds valuable information. A person who repeatedly avoids a particular goal is not simply procrastinating. They are receiving a message from within. That hesitation is an invitation to look deeper, to ask why a certain path feels blocked. The mind does not create barriers without reason. It is trying to protect something, whether it is a fear of failure, a fear of success, or an old wound that remains unresolved. Observing these patterns without judgment is essential. The goal is not to force change, but to understand the hidden motivations behind behaviors that seem irrational. Listening to emotions is another key aspect of integration. The unconscious speaks through feelings more than words. Anxiety, frustration, and sudden exhaustion are not random occurrences. They are signals from the shadow, attempts to steer attention towards something unresolved. A person who finds themselves overwhelmed by self-doubt in critical moments is not experiencing a simple lack of confidence. They are encountering a part of themselves that has been conditioned to believe they are not enough. Instead of pushing these emotions aside, they must be acknowledged. Instead of suppressing discomfort, it must be explored. The shadow does not exist to cause suffering. It exists to reveal what has been neglected. The more a person listens to their emotions, the clearer the messages from the unconscious become. Engaging in self-reflection allows the unconscious to come into focus. Jung believed that understanding the shadow required deep introspection, an honest look at the patterns that repeat in life. This does not mean dwelling on the past, but rather examining how past experiences continue to shape present behavior. The mind operates on associations. If success was once linked to rejection or criticism, then the unconscious will resist success at all costs. If vulnerability was once met with pain, then the unconscious will create distance in relationships. Identifying these associations is a step toward breaking free from them. The unconscious is not a prison. It is a system that can be rewritten. Taking responsibility for the shadow is essential. It is easy to blame circumstances, to believe that external factors are the cause of self-sabotage. But true transformation happens when a person realizes that the obstacles they face are often internal. This does not mean self-blame. It means recognizing that the power to change lies within. The shadow does not have to be an enemy. It can become a guide, revealing the parts of life that need attention. When resistance arises, it is an opportunity. When patterns repeat, it is an invitation to choose differently. The unconscious does not control destiny. It only controls what remains unexamined. Bringing the shadow into awareness requires conscious action. It is not enough to understand it intellectually. It must be engaged with directly. This can happen through creative expression, through writing, through honest conversations. The unconscious responds to symbols and images more than logic. Jung encouraged working with dreams, noticing recurring themes, and exploring the emotions they bring up. Anything that brings hidden thoughts and feelings into the open contributes to integration. The goal is not to eliminate the shadow, but to integrate it, to acknowledge its presence and allow it to become part of a whole self. As the unconscious becomes more visible, its grip weakens. The habits of self-sabotage begin to lose their power. The emotions that once seemed overwhelming become manageable. Decisions that once felt impossible become clear. This is not because the shadow disappears, but because it is no longer controlling life from behind the scenes. The process of integration does not happen overnight. It is a continuous journey, one that requires patience and self-compassion. But each step forward makes the path easier. Each moment of awareness creates more space for growth. Overcoming self-sabotage is not about becoming a different person. It is about becoming more of who one truly is, without the barriers created by fear, by repression, by unconscious patterns that no longer serve a purpose. The shadow is not the enemy. It is a forgotten part of the self, waiting to be seen. The moment it is recognized, its control begins to fade. The moment it is understood, it transforms from an obstacle into a source of strength. The unconscious may always be present, but it does not have to remain a mystery. It can become an ally in the journey of self-discovery, a guide toward a life no longer shaped by hidden fears, but by conscious choice. Part 7. Conclusion and Call to Action. The journey of overcoming self-sabotage is not about erasing the past or forcing change through sheer willpower. It is about seeing what has always been there, hidden in the unconscious, influencing every decision and shaping the way life unfolds. The shadow does not work against personal growth out of cruelty. It does so out of survival. It holds onto old fears, outdated beliefs, and wounds that have never fully healed, using them as barriers to protect what it believes is fragile. But protection is not the same as freedom. The unconscious, left unchecked, creates walls instead of bridges, keeping possibilities out and ensuring that the same patterns repeat endlessly. Recognizing the presence of the shadow is the first step toward breaking free from those cycles. Each hesitation, each moment of resistance, is an invitation to look deeper. The unconscious does not sabotage randomly. It does so with purpose. It seeks to maintain the familiar, even if that familiarity is painful. This is why real change often feels uncomfortable at first. It is not because something is going wrong, but because the mind is adjusting to a new way of being. Growth demands discomfort. It requires stepping into the unknown, even when the unconscious protests. But beyond that resistance lies something greater, a version of the self no longer limited by past fears, but empowered by awareness. The process of integration does not happen overnight. It is a lifelong practice of noticing, questioning, and choosing differently. Each time an old pattern resurfaces, it is an opportunity to respond in a new way. Instead of reacting automatically, there is space to pause, to understand, to decide. The shadow does not disappear, but it no longer has to control life from behind the scenes. It can be acknowledged, accepted, and even appreciated for the role it has played. Without it, there would be no lessons, no self-discovery, no depth to the human experience. Moving forward means embracing this process with patience. There is no final destination, no moment where everything is perfectly resolved. There is only the ongoing practice of awareness, the choice to remain open, the commitment to facing what arises instead of turning away. The unconscious may always whisper doubts and fears, but they no longer have to dictate reality. The more they are seen for what they are, echoes of the past rather than truths about the present, the less power they hold. Every person carries a shadow, but not everyone chooses to meet it. Those who do gain something invaluable, the ability to live with clarity without the weight of hidden forces pulling them backward. The past no longer has to define the future. The unconscious no longer has to be a mystery. The shadow, once feared, can become a guide, a source of strength rather than sabotage. The path to integration is the path to freedom, and that journey begins with a single step: the decision to see.